Hi everyone, it's Michelle here. Today I have two new stamp sets from the Alleyway Stamps. The bigger one that I'm showing you here is called It's My Party, and the smaller one is called Party Pooper. And they have a bunch of really cute creatures, but today I'm actually going to stick to the simpler balloon stamps, which I've already pulled out. And each of these stamp sets has a balloon, and they have a slightly different string, but I just pulled them both off. And I think I'm going to make a cluster of balloons to be the center of this card. So I pulled out some watercolor paper and also some Hero Arts dye ink, which is a waterproof ink because I will be doing some watercoloring for this card. And I'm just going to go ahead and stamp these, trying to alternate between the two balloons since they have slightly different strings. And I'm also doing some masking for one of these balloons because I wanted to have a really big cluster of balloons and the strings were kind of just getting in the way of each other. So when it was necessary, I just masked that off. And also some of these won't be reaching to the bottom of the card, but I can go ahead and draw those in at the end. So I pulled out my Zig Clean Color Real Brush pens. These are kind of like a watercolor marker, and recently I think they've been one of my favorite things to color with. So I'm just going ahead and kind of going in a rainbow pattern with these balloons. And I'm only coloring on kind of like the bottom and the edges of the balloon, and this will ensure that I kind of have that area of highlight that doesn't have too much color, and this will help to make them look a little more three-dimensional. And you can see I only have the really basic 12 color set, but since these are watercolor markers, once you layer the colors on top of each other and add some water, you get a lot of different values of the same color. So you can see how I even overlapped different colors on top of each other, like how I put the orange on top of the yellow, and it kind of blends into this yellow-orange so that you kind of get the look of a shadow without having to have like 5 different shades of yellow. And you can see, especially with this purple balloon, I didn't have a darker purple, so I just used blue, which is kind of a different color, but I blended it out so that it looked okay, and you can still kind of see how there's differences in the shades. I quickly went over all of these balloons with my Wink of Stella glitter brush pen, and you kind of have to work a little quickly with this since it does react with the watercolors, and it does get the colors moving a little bit, but that's why I had the little piece of scrap paper on the side to just take off any ink that got transferred onto my brush pen. Then I pulled out some glossy accents, which is just kind of like a clear varnish that I'm putting on top of these balloons. It has a really precise applicator, so it's really easy to just go over the edges, and I like to kind of outline along the edge of the shape and then fill in the middle. And I just quickly went over all of these balloons with a nice thick layer, which will have to dry. So after I clean off my tip, and I kind of popped any bubbles that are in there that sometimes get there with my X-Acto knife. I just laid this off to the side to dry, and this will take a few hours since I put a pretty thick layer of glossy accents on top. So now I came back a few hours later and it was all dry and it's all nice and shiny and clear. So I pulled out an acrylic block and the same zig markers that I used earlier, and I kind of want to create a background, and I'm mixing a few colors. So I mixed the blue, gray, and purple just to create some a really nice soft color. But actually before I do that, I have to stamp and heat emboss my sentiment because I'm going to be doing a watercolor background, but I want to have my sentiment kind of resist that. So I'll be stamping this in Versamark ink, and then I'm going to cover this up with white embossing powder. And the sentiment that I'm using is from the larger stamp set, and it says, "It's your day." So you can see how I just covered that up with white embossing powder, and I'm going to go ahead and heat set that off camera. So now it's all melted. You can see how it's shiny now, and once we do some watercoloring on top of this, it will resist that watercolor. So now I'm taking my brush pen again, my water brush I mean, and I'm just mixing up those colors that I had kind of just colored onto my acrylic block. You can just use any slick surface for this, like a craft mat, but this was easier since I had it on hand. And I needed a lot of water, so I just went ahead and used my mister bottle to spray some onto the acrylic block as well as on my actual watercolor paper. And this really helps to get the colors flowing. And if you're just using a regular brush and like some water in a cup, it really helps to wet your paper before you bring any color to it. And this helps the colors to blend really easily. But I just forgot to do that this time, which is why I sprayed my paper to get those colors moving. For the area around my sentiment, I wanted to make sure there was extra color because you kind of need more contrast for that white to show up. So I just took my Zig brush pens and colored directly onto the paper. But for the rest of the background, I was okay with this really soft watercolor look. You can kind of barely see it on camera, but you can see it a little better in person. And it just gives a little subtle hint of a background so that it's not just plain white paper. So since this is a little wet, I'm going to leave that off to the side to dry, and I'm just going to prep my card base. So I pulled out some light green cardstock and I cut it in half the long way, and I'm scoring it at 4 1/4 so that I have a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 card base, and I can save the other piece for a different card later. I trimmed off a little bit off of the side of that watercolor piece that I did, just so that I can have a little bit of the card base color showing through. And I also pulled out some washi tape. I wanted a contrasting color to kind of accentuate this line. So I went with this red wood grain one, and I marked off where I wanted to show. And I just want a really skinny line of this washi tape to be showing, just to give a little pop of color off to the edge. And you can see how this pulls in the warmer colors of the balloons, while the green card base ties in with the cooler colored balloons. So I went ahead and adhered this flat onto my card base, and I had a little bit hanging off of the edge, so I just cut that off with my X-Acto knife. So now, just for a little embellishment, I pulled out my little container of sequins and wood veneers, and I decided to pull out this little heart wood veneer, and I colored it in with my Copic markers just to make it match to that red washi tape that I have on the side. And since I had my glossy accents out, I'm using it as an adhesive for my wood veneer, and this will make sure that it stays put really well. And like I mentioned before, I'm going back and adding lines to the balloons that don't have strings and kind of going over the ones that do to make them a little darker so they're more complete. And after I did that, that finishes off my card. I hope this card gave you an idea of how you can take the simpler stamps in your stamp sets and make them the centerpiece of your card. And the little extra steps of adding some watercolor shading and some glitter and glossy accents really gives them more dimension to make them look more realistic. So on screen here I have some other tutorials that you might enjoy watching. All of them have something to do with watercolor, so feel free to check those out. If you like this video, make sure to also give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.